Hey everyone, welcome to the Volunteer Matters podcast.
Hey yo.
It's Mark and Sophia. Today we're talking about a very interesting topic, bad volunteers. And we'll talk more about what we mean by bad volunteers because, well, yeah, we'll get into it, but we'll talk about defining, detecting, and redirecting those types of volunteers. And I know it comes up in every organization that I've worked with. So every nonprofit is a bad volunteer will come up here and there. And so we'll dive into defining what is a bad volunteer. What do we mean by that?
Yeah. So sometimes we feel like that you can't get rid of bad volunteers unless they're really bad. And there is a case for saying this volunteer is not helping themselves, not helping the organization, and so we got to get rid of them. But the first thing that I wanted to do is to really split them into two major categories. So this came up because Sophia and I were having a conversation with a customer the other day, and this was an important distinction to make. There's in it when in the bad volunteer category, I would say that you have a volunteer that is either a bad actor or a bad fit. And that's obviously a super important distinction. So on the bad fit, I'm sorry, the bad actor category, these are people who actually join the organization for malicious or harmful intentions. And so sometimes people don't really think about this because most of us, hopefully, are very good people and can't imagine a world in which a volunteer would literally volunteer their time to an organization looking to make the world a better place, and they actually have malintent. But unfortunately, it happens, and it happens often enough where we need to be really aware of it, and we need to spend a disproportionate amount of time keeping those bad actors out of our organizations before they ever begin. So, there are lots of examples of this, but people get involved all the time to take advantage of people's kindness. So we've heard of organizations that provide services to seniors where they're actually getting involved so that they can gain access to vulnerable people and take advantage of them financially. Sometimes we see people who are getting themselves involved with programs that are targeting toward providing services to children, and they're actually there to cause harm to those kids. So these are really, really serious things that we have to make sure that we're keeping an eye toward. So from my standpoint, there are things that we need to do in order to keep them out, and there are things that we need to do in order to detect them should they happen to get through our defenses. So Sophia, I'll throw it to you, like some examples that you could provide as to how our customers are keeping bad actors out of their organizations.
Yeah, so definitely creating policies to train volunteers when they first get onboarded is huge. And then also making sure that it's on the forefront of their mind by requiring them to retake trainings annually or sign policies and also reinforce like, oh, here's where you go if you see a red flag. And just making sure that everyone has their uh, eyes open for that sort of behavior because it really isn't, the normal person doesn't walk around thinking about it unless you're in HR, right? You don't think about like, oh, these people are out there, ready to cause harm. So it is important to train people. What else have I seen? I guess.
Well, that those are great things once a bad actor is in, like they've gotten through the front door. You're saying that we should make sure we have policies in place, training in place so that people can detect those bad actors once they're through the door. But how about things that, which is critically important? Also, staff, same thing. Staff needs to have that training so that, I mean, even more importantly, because they're there all the time. But how about actually preventing bad actors from getting there in the first place?
Oh yeah, yeah. So background checks.
Yeah.
So it's a really, really important one. Um, Interviews, volunteer interviews. Yeah, so those are two
Reference
major
checks.
ones. Reference
Reference
checks, yeah,
checks can
make sure
help.
that you're calling people's professional and personal references, and
Yeah, there are
yeah.
actually with the background checks, they're great. And then the obvious about them is that it's detecting people after they have already committed a crime. So it's not the end all be all. Like a lot of legislators out there are legislators out there think they're really patting themselves in the back because they think they're doing this amazing thing by requiring organizations to do background checks. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing. Background checks are fantastic. Then they'll go out and they'll say, let's fingerprint everybody. And that is also not awful. In fact, obviously for people who have committed crimes already, that is critically important. But the idea of reference checks and interviews, like actually talking to another person, can actually prevent bad actors from breaking through. And sometimes what we catch is we catch people who haven't yet been caught in a crime. And so
Yeah.
that's where it takes some skills to know how to interview and how to assess those references, but that's important too. Do you have something you wanted to add to that?
Well, it's just I most often see that it's a comprehensive profile of a volunteer, so it's a combination of the background check, interview, reference check, and just generally like the application they submit. Like have they put thought and effort into their application?
Yeah, that's a great
Yeah.
point. Yeah, so we're trying to get like a multifaceted view of the volunteer. And obviously, the higher the risk the thing the volunteer is doing, the more of those things we have to do. So, it might be as simple as, a vibe check when they walk in a room if they're doing nothing but stacking boxes in a room by themselves. You know what I mean? But if they're working vulnerable populations, that's when you really have to worry about them because they actually seek those scenarios out. You have like bad people like looking for vulnerable populations. So keep them out to begin with. Once they get in, really good training and policies as to see something, say something. What are you looking for? Who do you report those things to if you see something that seems off? Right.
So
So
what's
yeah,
yeah,
go
what's
ahead.
the difference between bad actors and a poor fit? So a
Yeah.
bad fit volunteer. Um,
Yeah, so bad actor, they're actually trying to do your organization harm. And bad fit means that they're just not doing a good job at volunteering in essence. So they're not actively trying to cause physical, financial, emotional, harm to the people in and around your organization. They're not quite um, just doing a good job, right? So it's disruptive. It might even borderline be kind of feel toxic. They don't feel like that they're a good fit. They're creating more work than they're doing. They're not happy while they're there. They're not making other people happy while they're there. So that's kind of what I mean when I say poor fit. So there are, a few things that you can, well, let's throw it into a couple of categories. So this is the way that I see a volunteer that is not a good fit. Number one is that they're not really connected to your mission. And sometimes that is because they might be there for different reasons. So in the vast majority of cases, volunteers who are there volunteering for your animal sanctuary, your museum, your community center, your medical research nonprofit, whatever it is, they're there because they have some sort of personal or emotional connection to your mission. It means something to them, and they want to dedicate time in order to make a difference in that area. Like that's what we want, right? Those are the best volunteers. They also become, they support you in other ways. They become donors and they become, advocates out in the public. And so they all around, they're like the most awesome supporters. Sometimes people don't join for those reasons. And you have to be aware that that happens. Um, Sometimes they join for a reason like they're just lonely. They want something to do. And that's not so bad. Like it's, working with an organization, volunteering because you're lonely, you might want to meet new people, you've just moved to the area. That's a great way to meet people. So the connected to the mission, think of these almost as like little red flags kind of thing. It might not be a bad problem, but it may be too. Um,
right.
right.
Yeah,
So
sometimes
that's,
someone's like, I know a big reason for getting involved in volunteering is like you either had professional experience in that area. So, like, I don't know, maybe you were a nurse and you want to go volunteer in a hospital. And then other times, like, someone doesn't have experience, they want to learn a new skill. And that might be okay too, depending on your volunteer program. Like, are you welcoming people who don't yet have skills? Can you coach them up to get those skills? So, I guess it really does depend on the program.
well, that's a great point too, is the skills gap. Like somebody might be a bad volunteer if they volunteer and they actually don't have the necessary skills. And again, we can do some things to make sure that they have the right skills before we place them in there, but sometimes we don't know, you know. Um, so they just get in there and you realize, oh boy, they're not really, they really have the
Or
skill set to do this,
maybe they told you
right?
they have the skills, but they're not really performing up
Maybe
to.
not. Right. And
It
sometimes that
happens.
happens. Like people don't want to say, oh, I don't really know. I mean, we've had situations where somebody volunteered, they're literally a CPA and they don't know how to file a tax return. Like they never had to do that thing and they're just not very good at it or they're extremely slow. Like we have somebody who's a CPA, but they're so meticulous almost to the extent where things are coming, you know, to a grinding halt or um, so whenever we see that there's a skills gap that can be overcome, then the goal would be let's train them up. Let's put them with someone else who another volunteer maybe that can help them improve their skills because as you adeptly pointed out, sometimes they're volunteering in order to improve their skills in something. They're actually there to learn a new skill that is connected to a mission that they care about. So what else would be another bad fit thing that you can think of, Sophia?
Overall attitude's everything. No, it really is. But are they coming in with a negative mindset? That'll ruin almost any job, even if they have really good skills in an area. Like, are
Yeah.
they connected to or do they fit your culture as an organization? And yeah.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, culture is a good umbrella to put that under. Are they a good culture fit? Is a great one. Under culture, attitude falls under that, and I think temperament falls under it. Sometimes temperament isn't necessarily a bad thing. Like I have my best friend is a school teacher. I do not have the temperament to teach elementary school kids. I'm very patient. I'm a very patient person, but I could not be an elementary school teacher. I do, I that's not it doesn't fit my temperament. I have too high expectations even for kids unless they're my own, and even then sometimes. So sometimes it is like like putting somebody in charge of a kids program as a volunteer when they don't have the patience for it. Maybe they did when they were younger, now they're retirement age and they don't have the patience for it anymore, thought they did. It's your responsibility along with the volunteer to say, yeah, there's a little bit of a temperament gap there as well. And sometimes people can just be rude, like they don't fit culturally. They walk in cranky, they don't have the right attitude, they're complaining about everything. That's when they start borderlining on, not being a good culture fit. And if you combine that with not really being connected to the mission, they might fall into the category of just being toxic. And in any situation, whether they're employed or they're volunteers, toxic people, they infect other people. So they end up impacting the kind of experience that other volunteers are having, which we definitely don't want. So if they're not connected to the mission and they're not a good culture fit, that's probably, if you combine those two things, that's probably the reason to fire the volunteer. So I have one example that I will remove names from to protect the innocent, but I had an organization that that had a volunteer that also happened to be a donor. And because of the size of his donations, they put him in charge as a volunteer, in charge of something pretty important. And that person would quite literally curse people out and yell at people and demean people. And I feel for this person because I met with him and I had a sit down with him, and what I really learned through that experience is that this particular person was having a really hard time post-retirement realizing what their value was, because his value was very much tied up in a very high-powered job that he had. And after he retired, he, in my opinion, lost something, and he was trying to regain that through a nonprofit organization. And so he was an extremely successful guy in his professional life. He retires, and now he has no value anymore. And so, and of course, none of this is conscious. It's not like, and I only play a psychologist on TV, but it became pretty obvious to me. And you see this a lot in retirees who volunteer, especially males, where they are trying to replicate the value that they had when they were working. And so if you had a really high performing person that was in a very big job and now they come into your nonprofit, they may donate some money. And so they feel like that they're there to gain some sort of value from that. And unfortunately, this person, as I might imagine, in their high power job was a bit of a tyrant in that job. And so that's what he was trying to replicate here, as if he was the big boss man and he could tell people what to do and people had to snap too, because he's a big donor and, has big responsibilities. Um, and I felt for him because I could tell he kind of felt lost in his place in the world and that he had put all of this value in his own self in his job. And now he was looking to replicate that, but that's not the right, I feel for that. And at the risk of losing a donor, you cannot have that occur in an organization. So in that case, they found something different for him to do where he could be a little bit more behind the scenes, and also had to pair him up with some very strong personalities themselves in a way that ended up working out really well for them. So they sort of retired him from that role, which was a very good thing. They were able to maintain their donor, even though he had the capacity to be a pretty toxic personality. So we have
Wow.
number one, not connected to the mission. Maybe they're there for a different reason. Oh, you know what? So that's, you know what I call that? I call that, by the way, like the condo association or HOA association board volunteer. So yeah, there's like lots of stuff that goes around online with this, making fun of this type of person. But there are people who join their HOA board or their condo association board because they genuinely care about their community and they want it to be nicer and they want the flower beds to be nice and they want the community rec room to be well cared for. And then there are sometimes people who go in there because they want to have some place of power and authority where they can sort of flex their muscles. So you always have to, especially in board volunteering, you really have to keep an eye out for that. Okay. Anyway, connected to the mission, they're there for the right reasons, the right temperament or culture fit, as you said, Sophia. And then there's the skills gap, right? And we talked about times when if somebody doesn't quite have the skills, maybe they thought they did, but they don't. Maybe they said they did, but they definitely didn't. Maybe they just, it seems like a skill that you thought, that anybody could have, and this person just doesn't. The question there is this something we can overcome? And if so, train them, provide them with the training. If not, let's see if we can find them something else to do. So sometimes that there are a big enough skills gap where they just can't overcome it. And so we might see that with an individual with a cognitive or developmental disability, right? And there's just something that we can't get them there. Or sometimes we have people come in and, really this you should know it ahead of time, but you have like somebody who, you have them packing boxes in a warehouse at a food bank or something like that, and they just can't lift the boxes, right? So we need to find something else for them. They're not physically able to do that. So there's no training them, over that skill. So that would be the third thing. And you might get to a point that, so I guess I will summarize now, and I think unless Sophia, you have anything else that you feel like that I missed or that you've seen out there in the wild?
Related to like poor fit or
yeah, just bad fit or anything that I may have forgotten or neglected to mention.
what's cool is that when you really have a robust volunteer program, you can get people involved in all different areas of the organization. Like someone could be in the back doing, sorting records, or I don't know what people do in the office, but or they can get involved in marketing. So I just feel like there's a lot of opportunity within an organization for all sorts of people to get involved. So like there are different things you can do before you say, all right, well, we can't have you as a volunteer at all. Like so what are some of those things how would you approach someone who maybe they're in the wrong job? I mean, it's a tough
All right.
situation.
I'm going to restate the brilliance of what you just said. So there are a lot of organizations where they think of volunteering as like one thing. Even very large organizations. Like we have some organizations that have 5,000 volunteers and all 5,000 basically do the same thing. And there are many, many areas within your organization. If you really put your mind to it, you can come up with how can we utilize volunteers there. And so if we do have a volunteer that is a bad fit, not a bad actor, but is a bad fit, 99 times out of 100, you should be able to find something else. Because if you have somebody that's connected to the mission, you have somebody that's a good culture fit, and maybe they just don't have the skills, or maybe they don't have just the exact right temperament for this specific thing, we should absolutely see if we can find something else. We shouldn't ignore or reject their talents, their passion, their connection to the mission, because it does pay dividends. There's, it either just in karma or in actual dividends that come in from that. And even I mentioned individuals with like a cognitive disability. We should absolutely be finding things for them. I did an interview. I went to an organization where we were doing a testimonial to come and volunteer with them. They wanted to put a video out saying why it was so great to volunteer with the organization. So we were there to help facilitate that production of that video. And I didn't even know that this was going to happen. When we showed up, we had about 10 volunteers that they wanted us to interview. And it was supposed to be like well, why did you interview here? What have you gotten out of it? What's the organization like? How are you connected to the mission? And 3 of the volunteers that they brought up were those with, developmental delays, individuals with cognitive disabilities. Maybe one of them, I remember, had autism. He was the best. He was hilarious and the best interview ever, although it took us about, I think, half an hour to get a 2-minute segment because he was so excited and happy to talk to us about everything. And it was a beautiful thing to see, how volunteering impacted them. But it was an even more beautiful thing to see how the staff felt about them. And this was like off-camera stuff that I wish we could have gotten caught on camera. But the staff felt like, they were so lit up with working with these individuals. And they actually contributed way more, even though they needed more help to deliver on the volunteer jobs. What they provided outside of the actual work they were doing was something that you really couldn't even measure. So finding jobs for volunteers to do is a really important part of this. Finding something where they are a good fit. Where can they make an impact, even if that impact is tangential to what you're actually asking the volunteer to do. And when it all comes down to it, there may be a case for firing a volunteer. Sometimes I'll talk to people and they're like, "You can do that?" like people feel like because they're not getting paid, you can't fire them. No, absolutely. And here's the best way. I have my cousin's wife is a pretty high-powered executive in sales, and she has to fire people all the time, and she never has a problem with it. And I'm gonna steal from her and tell you what made me feel better about it. And by the way, even with firing employees, if you have somebody that's connected to your mission and a good fit, you should find them a different job within your organization, because those are good culture fits. And so if you just want to find them someplace where they can make a positive impact. But if it ends up not really working out and you do need to fire them, it's being done with the ultimate amount of decency and compassion and sensitivity, but also stating the obvious. And like she says, I'll just walk into the room and I'll say, "Listen, John," whoever it is, "listen, John, I think we both know that this isn't really a great fit. You seem to be frustrated by this position, and we don't want you to be frustrated. And we've explored different ways in which we can provide you different types of opportunities. We've thought about maybe how we can, put you into a position where your skills can really be taken full advantage of. And we haven't been able to find that for you. And so, I know that you're not happy here and you're not able to make an impact on the mission in the way that you would like. And so I think we're going to have to, for now, part ways until maybe we can come up with a new volunteer position that might be a better fit. But you're not happy here, right?" And the person will be like, "I've been kind of frustrated, But sometimes with volunteers, you may get somebody where you find out that they really are there because they're lonely. And even though they're toxic and critical and, not a good skills fit and not connected to the mission at all, they still argue that they would like to stay. And the best that I can say is just being sensitive and compassionate. And the bottom line is that it isn't a great fit for what we need out of this position. And definitely the thing that always leaves like kind of you don't want to close the door all the way because maybe someday in the future there would be something where there would be a good fit. We review these things all the time, and I would love to invite you back if there's a volunteer position that we feel like would fit you better. What do you think? You think, Sophia,
It's
that would play?
hard.
It is.
I know it. No, I think being honest is always the best route for anything like that, even if it's
Yeah,
difficult.
and usually the person knows. It's not like, we have volunteers, they're getting into fights with other people. Usually it's, I mean, really talking about you've exhausted all other things. So we haven't been able to find someplace else that we can use this volunteer, and you should exhaust all of those because the benefit to having them around, if they, again, are not toxic and do fit your culture and everything else, absolutely find them something else. All right, so we learned today, what did we learn? We learned that bad actors are actually maliciously trying to do us harm, keep them out, and then put policies, procedures, trainings in place to detect them if they should slip through the cracks. And that we have, three main things. Are they connected to the mission? Are they here for the right reasons? Second thing is, do they fit with the culture? Do they have the right temperament, right? They're not toxic. Third thing is there a skills gap? If there is a gap, can we train them? And if so, we absolutely should. And if we can't, we should find something else. And then overall, our posture should definitely be find something else, see what else they can do, unless they do truly fall under that toxic, problematic category. And then we just kindly and respectfully tell them it's not a good fit, that we'll, keep them in the backs of our mind as we constantly evaluate new volunteer opportunities and reach out to them should anything, come up that we think would be a good fit. And leave it at that. Right?
Yeah, you said it so nicely.
I've had to fire a few people in my life. It's my absolute least favorite thing to do in the world, but ultimately we're actually giving them a gift because if it's not a good fit, they do know, even if not consciously, they know on some level. And so they can find something that's better. And if we have them stick around here, they're less likely to find something that isn't a good fit that they feel they find to be more fulfilling. So.
Talking about a volunteer relation, like a romantic relationship. It's like the same thing.
No, well, you know this, but I have been dating or married to my high school sweetheart for 35, 36 years. So I don't know that, unfortunately. Although we did almost break up once, but that's a podcast for an entirely.
That's another podcast.
Yeah. All right. All right, everybody.
Awesome.
Thanks for joining us.
See you next time.
Bye.